as mediums, trusting what we see, trusting what the spirit shows, and not listening to the left brain, which is saying, oh, that's too crazy, don't say that. Or, no, you didn't hear that name, don't say that. You
Yeah.
have to trust. You have to forget the left brain and just trust. But when I'm on the path, at first, before came out for my sister, I thought, do I really want to do this? And my left kept saying, no, 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 but I could taste it. My right brain took over, and I guess it does something to my glands to where there's that saliva. I don't know, but I can just taste it. And it's not a drool, but there's just a sense, which I'm 66 years old, and I know enough to trust that taste.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Spiritual Talk. Today, my guest is the wonderful Nancy Nohavec. Now, have I pronounced that properly, Nancy?
Yes, you have. Nohavec.
Thank you for being on Spiritual Talk. It's an absolute privilege you're here today.
The pleasure's mine.
Now, some of you at home might already realize or recognize your surname. You are the sister of Janet, and recently deceased. So we're sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
But your lives intertwine because you're both mediums.
Right.
Can we talk about the early beginnings of what that was like for you?
Sure. Well, Janet and I both saw our dead grandfather when we were just little girls. Janet was 6 years old and I was 4. Janet saw him during the day. And I remember she kept seeing this fellow in a garage, and my mother was ironing, and she came into the room. I was next to my mother, and she was sheet white, and I knew something was off. And then my mother said, "Oh, shush." My mother was European, and shooed her away. And then my sister Janet came back in again, and this time she was like really sheet white, but she was a little girl. I was a little girl.
Yeah.
And later that night, I saw him. In the middle of the night with my mother. I was sick, and my mother we had a pull-out sofa, and my mother was sleeping with me, or I was sleeping with my mother. And I saw him at night. He actually came out of the kitchen. I was scared to death. And so what we didn't know was our grandfather had committed suicide. And
Right.
my mother didn't want to discuss it, and it was bad luck, and this was, something that she didn't want us to further. And so that's where it started. But Janet and I always had a special connection because we had that, we could see and we could hear, and we just knew, that knowing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned your mum kind of wanting to shut that down a little bit. What was that like growing up in a household? I mean, am I right in saying you had a religious background?
No, we had no religious
Oh,
background.
okay.
No.
Because I know Janet went on to be a nun, didn't she?
Yes, she did. No, and it was, I guess, a reaction to not having a religious background.
Okay.
Our parents were from Europe. My father was from Czechoslovakia, my mother from Poland, but they were prisoners of war, and during Catholic prisoners of war during Nazi Germany. So they were my father was it was total chaos. If you've read my sister's book, it was really chaotic and dysfunctional. But my mother was very angry with God. And so we were brought up to question everything, including God and all churches. So it wasn't until everything literally imploded that I found God. And then my life went on a different trajectory than Janet's. And then Janet later became a nun. So, yeah.
Yeah. And because you went into the corporate world.
I did.
Which in itself, how do you then, I mean, was it something you had to suppress, this innate ability that you had, this natural ability of mediumship?
Well, the way I funneled mine was, again, getting back to, my father went bankrupt, and it was not just nowadays you go bankrupt and it's very civil, but back then it was a dramatic bankruptcy. There were sheriffs at the door. They broke down the door. I wasn't there at the time. I was just coming home from school, but Janet went to live with someone. The whole family fell apart.
Yeah.
So I went to live with my dear friend's family. They were Christians, but and I just suppressed it. But the knowing, I knew I had to do something because I had to help my mother financially.
Yeah.
And I knew I had to get out of New Jersey, where people knew of my family, because we were kind of known as that family.
Okay.
It was that dysfunctional. And so I went to New York City, and first I went into the art world, and I recognized I was not artistic. And along with the fact that I needed to make money to help my family, my mother, namely, I went to Wall Street as a clerk, and I just knew. But getting back to your question, when you're that broken, you go inward. And when I went inward, the only person I could trust was me. There I am. I'm 18 years old on Wall Street.
Yeah.
And I just have to trust my gut
Yeah.
and God. I call it God. And my gut has always led me in the right way.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Did you have any, as you move through life, did spirit come calling?
He's always been there. Like, I've heard voices through the
Okay.
years. Janet and I discussed it. And again, before Janet was famous, Janet and I were, kind of diddling with this, and
Yeah.
just discussing it. And so it's always been present, and it's always been part of our conversation. So, yeah, spirit was always there. Some people call it spirit because of my faith in God. I call it God.
Yeah.
Some people call it the divine. It doesn't matter what you call it. It is that faith in it or
Yeah.
that really helps you along the way. And so for me on Wall Street, um, I just always trusted my faith. I always trusted my faith and spirit. Sometimes I would literally hear voices on what to do. And, and I listened. I had that faith, always listened to it. And so it really helped me along the way. And in addition, I was really good at math. So that helped me on Wall Street.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So, what was the actual turning point when you decided to embrace mediumship?
I would say, well, around 2010, 12, around there, because um, I like to fix up old houses. And so old houses have creaks and things like that.
Yeah.
But I would walk into a room and beautiful mounted drapes would come crashing to the floor. Things would go flying. And I would just say, Janet, it's time. It's just time. And Janet said, all right. And so, Janet with the Journey Within,
Yeah.
everybody from Arthur Finley was there. So I would take courses. A lot of them initially didn't know I was her sister. And so I would just sit there. And there's a funny story, if I may,
Yeah. Please. Please.
at, at the Journey Within, when no one knew I was Janet's sister, I lived about half an hour away, and she had the advanced Monday night course. And this was way back when. This is well over 10 years ago. And there were other people teaching the class because the class grew and grew. And I said to her, I said, Janet, I'm sure they're good, but I want to be in your class. I don't want to be in their class. So Janet would, this is really funny. And she would laugh at this. So Janet would walk around with a hat so that everyone would pick out, blindly,
Yeah.
which teacher you were going to be, which class you were going to be in. So she would come up to me, and out of the side of her mouth, she would say, take the paper from my hand. And so that I got her class, and we would just laugh. We always had fun together. And so, that's what I did. And I've taken classes. I mean, Mavis has been to my house for dinner. Stella, Paul, and no, what's his name? Steve and Stella have been to my house for dinner.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I know a lot of, Brian and Simon. I know all of them.
Yeah.
And so it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like a lot of fun. And the Journey Within was, am I right in saying it's one of the first lights, if you like, one of the first churches within the spiritual movement in America? Am I right in saying that?
Janet was amazing in what she achieved. And she really was. And I just don't think she's gotten enough credit, to be honest. And that's one of the things that I'm going to try and do, is really focus on Janet and bring her books. Her books have, were really, really popular, and they've just gone out of print. So I'm working with the estate on helping to bring those back into publication. Hopefully that we can get that done. But yes, when Janet went to Arthur Findlay, she had a few very senior tutors, and I've forgotten the one fellow. He would come to the Journey Within when she didn't have brick and mortar.
Mhm.
Um, it was out of a bookstore. She leased certain spaces, and then they would have joint meetings. And she finally raised the money and actually built the church, and it became a school.
Wow.
And yeah, she was truly, truly amazing.
I believe that was Leonard Young, if I'm right in
Yes,
saying. It
yes,
was, yes, yes, because Leonard has mentioned Janet a few times, so I know they had quite a close relationship, especially in the beginning.
yeah.
But yeah, wonderful, wonderful. So it's fair to say that your sister was a pioneer in the US with the church that she created. But
Especially being an ex-nun.
yeah,
And, and I don't know, well, she's gone now, but she actually had to sue them because the Catholic Church, based on their discrimination on her being a spiritualist. And
oh wow,
she won. I
oh
don't know if
good
you
on
knew that,
her.
but she
Oh,
did.
oh, good on her. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. I'm sorry to say this, but I am going to say this. Your sister did a fabulous work, and it's easy to kind of get caught up in your sister's legacy.
Yes.
Where do you sit in that? You seem to be okay with that, but I think sometimes there's a danger that we can get lost under somebody else's shadow
Yeah.
when you,
No,
in your own right, you're a medium. You know,
yeah, I am. But I'm different.
yeah,
And Janet and I, again, we were sisters. All I had to do was pick up the phone and, ask her this, or we would talk about that. While she was still a nun, I have a summer house on the St. Lawrence River just across from Canada. We would practice on each other. And so, are you seeing someone? Are you going psychic? Da, da, da. She first practiced Reiki on me. I said, never. I wanted a back massage, and she's doing this away from me. And I thought, like, I'm getting gypped. And so, no, but Janet is a legend. And no one, and I'm just going to say this. I've seen a lot of mediums, but Janet was number one in evidence. I mean, she could get every little detail.
yeah,
I focus more on the message. What is the message? I bring my evidence and I'm evidential, but then I lean in and I bring in, how can our spirits help us in present day? So sometimes I go psychic, sometimes I don't, but it usually focuses in on what's going on today in
yeah,
someone's life, and they're very helpful. So Janet and I debated, and because we were sisters, I would say, "Come on, Janet," and so we had a banter, which was lovely, and I
yeah.
really truly miss her. So I am not Janet. Janet, there's no one like Janet. No one.
No, no,
Yeah.
no, absolutely. But you're here to carry on that marvelous work.
Because I promised my sister I would.
That is wonderful, wonderful. And I just wanted to come back to you though, in terms of your beginnings. Did you then just go, do you know what? I'm going to surrender to mediumship or walk away from your life in
No,
work?
no, 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 no. Oh, well, I'll just say, I have three kids. After working on Wall Street, if you work at certain names, everybody gets a name.
Yeah,
You work in Wall Street. I served on several boards, local boards, museum board, the National Historical Park of New Jersey. I had in the arenas that I was in, um, saying that you're a medium, it would not be welcome. So I had to carefully, leak it out.
yeah,
And so it was right after Janet died. And I mentioned to you before we started that 2 weeks before Janet died, she came to my house and we would have joint readings. We were sisters, we were really close. We would talk about everything. So she came to my house. We had a joint reading. And for years, she was, trying to get me to come out. And I just said, yeah, 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 yeah. And then 2 weeks before she went into surgery, no one was expecting her to die.
yeah,
This time she was really annoyed with me. And it was right here in this room. And she said, why aren't you doing this? And like in a frustration I'd never seen before. And then she died. And so I wrestled with it. And I was in a bad place for a long time because we were really close.
yeah,
And so I started a website a year later because I thought, holy moly, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but
Okay.
it's so I said I promised Janet, and Janet does. I do see her, I
Yeah.
see her, but I promised Janet that I would come out, so I have to come out. So I just did it. I did it, and I have a website. I can't figure out joining the Nancy Nohavec Intuitive with my Nancy Johnston Facebook, but whatever. I'm a klutz going along. So I started my website. I've read some different people and a lot of people actually, but I had been reading people beforehand,
Yeah.
but quietly. But now everybody knows I do fundraisers, and I love doing fundraisers. Everybody knows. And I resigned from all of my very conservative boards before they could kick me off.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Be interesting to see if you got feedback from your older life, people coming. Oh, I never knew you did that, Nancy. I didn't realize you was a medium.
Well, a lot of people, no, a lot of people don't, and a lot of people, they judge you,
Yeah,
and I don't care,
yeah,
I really don't care. I mean, yeah, and so I'm on a new journey now, and the journey, metaphorically, the journey within. When the one thing Janet and I always discussed, and the one thing that's different is Janet and I had each other. What do you think about that? What do you think about that? And so Janet was so good that, like, we just sounded off each other our entire lives.
yeah,
And that was a blessing because, I don't know if you have a family member or someone that's close enough that you could do this all along.
mm,
And so when I was trading on Wall Street and doing really, really well, Janet said, like, well, what are you doing? I said, well, I hear voices, Janet. I hear voices. But if I were to say that to anybody else, they think I'm crazy. So I kept my mouth shut. And so, but Janet was the only one who's like, all right, okay, that makes sense. And she heard voices. And so when she was in the convent and she would have to meditate, and meditation and being alone is
yeah,
key because that's when you hear, that's when you sense. And so when she recognized she was being visited than more than Catholic saints, and she was being, visited by, just everyday people and relatives. And she was like, hey, wait a second, what's going on here?
yeah,
So it's been a journey, but the journey is usually within.
yeah,
And we both agreed that you have to trust whatever, how crazy it is that they show you, that trust, that faith has to be just so, what is it? Assured. That's when you can give great messages.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
Always trust in the message.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
And what you see or hear depends on which cognitive ability you have. And so I know people who give great readings and they don't see people. I see people
yeah,
and I also hear them sometimes. Sometimes I can taste, but in my path, getting back to my sense before coming out and relying on my intuitiveness, I could always taste whether or not I was on the right path in
yeah.
business. And, then I went to work at an antique firm after I resigned in 1991. I went back to school. And, it's an interesting story. I don't know if you'd like to hear it or if I'm
Yeah,
all right. So again, in my faith, I was thinking, I'm kind of bored. My kids were small, and I'll show you. I resigned because look at these girls. Aren't they cute? How could I
oh
not?
yeah, absolutely.
But now they're older and they're great. And so I hung out with them, and then I went back to NYU for decorative arts, and I thought I'll do something fun. And I went into myself, into my faith. I prayed. Some people call it meditation. I call it praying. And I went to a symposium, and this scholar who worked at the number one antique firm in the world asked me if I wanted a job. And I thought, at first I thought, what's going on? Is he picking up on me? Which he wasn't. And then, so I got the job, and I kept thinking, I don't have an art degree. People who work there at this firm, they furnished the White House.
Yeah,
They had, installations at museums. Um, why does he want me here? And I recognized later that they were going bankrupt, and
right.
they didn't need a scholar in the art field. They needed someone that could help them out. So that was really divine intervention. And
Yeah.
so I said, I'll help you out. They made me director of operations. I took over, everything financial, and I helped them out of bankruptcy and sullying their name, which is world renowned. It was a firm called Israel Sack, and it was a wild run. It was great, and all the finds that we had, and multi-million dollar pieces. It was so much fun. But again, my instinct brought me along there and helped bring them out of bankruptcy, and it was just a great ride. So if you're not reading, even through life, if you choose to trust the intuition, it'll bring you to places that you've never been to before. I never should have gotten that job, but I did.
You just took the words out of my mouth. That's exactly what I was going to say. You don't have to be on the big medium. Here I am doing readings for people. If you trust your intuition, you have that connection, you meditate, you will naturally find where you're supposed to be in life.
Absolutely. And sometimes, on Wall Street, it took me years to get work to
Yeah.
be the chief trader and officer of the firm. However, um, ego, ego is the destroyer of everything. You cannot have an ego. So I worked my ass off, and then at is the artwork the antique firm, there were a lot of people who were in the industry who mocked me and laughed at me because I did not have a degree. What is she doing here? Like, who the hell does she think she is? It was a small firm,
Yeah.
but inevitably it all turned around. It was just great. But I think right now this is where I'm supposed to be. I can taste it. So I am supposed to be a medium. I wasn't expecting to, so I don't want to be a star. I don't have to go on a platform, and I don't plan on going on TV or anything. This is lovely doing a podcast, but I'm doing what Janet wanted me to do, and I can taste it because I feel I've gone inward. This is what I'm supposed to do.
Okay, a couple of things that you've mentioned.
Okay.
First things first, 3 or 4 times you've mentioned, I can taste it.
Yes.
Now, not everybody has that ability. I have received taste myself, so I know it can open up and give you a vision within itself. How does that work for you with taste? Because a lot of people don't experience that necessarily.
Well, I don't necessarily taste peppermint
Yeah.
or eggplant or anything like that. Like there's a sense in my glands that I'm on the right path, if I'm questioning it in your mind. And this is where my trading comes into, I can explain this metaphorically. I used to take large positions of gold and some, before silver for the firm. So
Yeah.
really big positions to where the P&L swings were, scary, frightening, unless you're accustomed to it. As soon as you take a position, left brain, right brain, your left brain says, "You stupid fool, this is the worst thing you've ever done," and so you have to be able to conquer that. So, in my trading ability, I would, do the technical analysis, fundamental analysis. I would do the research, and then I would take a position. But still, I had that left brain saying, you're on the wrong path, the doubt. That's what it is, the doubt. So as mediums, and then I'm going to go to the path. As mediums, trusting what we see, trusting what the spirit shows, and not listening to the left brain, which is saying, "Oh, that's too crazy. Don't say that." Or, "No, you didn't hear that name. Don't say that." You
Yeah.
have to trust. You have to forget the left brain and just trust. But when I'm on the path, at first, before like came out for my sister, I thought, do I really want to do this? And my left kept saying, no, 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 but I could taste it. My right brain took over, and I guess it does something to my glands to where there's that saliva. I don't know, but I can just taste it. And it's not a drool, but there's just a sense, which I'm 66 years old, and I know enough to trust that taste.
Wow, that is well. It's just isn't the human body amazing?
Yeah, it is.
And the
It is.
senses that we have within that. The next question I wanted to ask you is how do we deal with the ego? So, no disrespect to anybody out there. I have seen some people that tend to go off in the ego a little. how do we have to have ego to do what we're doing. We're, doing podcasts or getting, I do a lot of public demonstrations. There has to be a little bit of ego, but
Well, I think I I I disagree with that. I think confidence is a good thing,
yeah,
but confidence without with rationality. Confidence in yourself. Okay, here I am. I'm going to do this podcast, and I'm confident that this will go off,
yeah,
fairly well.
yeah,
Where ego comes in and it becomes irrational. So irrational exuberance is
yeah,
what kills everything.
yeah,
So it's that irrational, oh, well, I really did that. So I'm going to go on and do the next, podcast, and
yeah,
I'm going to get 5,000 or
yeah,
12,000 or whatever. So you just have to tame the confidence. And if you have a setback, which we all do,
yeah,
you just you don't crumble over it. You just say, okay, I'm going to pick myself up and I forgive myself and I'm just going to continue onward. And we'll see where, it's just life is a wonderful ride. It really is.
yeah,
And I have setbacks. I've had many. I have doubts. Janet did. And, even with her being as great as she was, but she said ego and pride. Really, pride befalls nations, it
yeah,
befalls empires,
yeah.
and ego befalls people.
Absolutely. I always get nervous before a demonstration, always. And I struggle to focus that in a positive aspect. So potentially the first one or two readings are not as good as when I'm in the flow. I'm
Right.
trying to harness that. And but I look at that as a good thing, because if I don't ever get nervous before a demonstration, then I've gone into that kind of ego self and look at me, I'm doing this, and no problem. What is it? It's a walk in the park. I think there has to be a little bit of that. I think it
Oh,
does.
definitely, definitely. But the nervousness, you have to get to know that is an emotion, and
Yeah,
so get to know sometimes. And I too get nervous, and I was nervous before coming on here today, and so when you get to know your nerves, and that's part of us. And along with our gift with, communicating with the other side, there will be a good nervous and a not so good nervous.
yeah,
And once you get to know your own emotions, I think it's your friend. And it's
yeah.
kind of exhilarating. It's getting your adrenaline going and it's piquing your awareness. And so, yeah, no, I think that's a good thing.
And it's also that conscious space where you become consciously conscious of self.
Yes.
You become consciously conscious of self, and how do you then kind of get through that you're consciously conscious of self when you're demonstrating? Because you've got, you're only going to one or two people with a message, and then say there's 50 people in the audience. You've got all those eyes looking at you.
Yeah.
Well, this
Yeah.
is the way he said that. So people tend to be a little bit self-critical. So I'm trying not to absorb that and manage the energy within the room. So that,
Right. Right. I see that. Yeah. And I've done some groups. The largest I had was 50. And same thing. And so I try not to look at the reactions because I'm there to give a message. I'm there for spirit, and the spirit wants me to give a message. And there was one group message where it was so confusing. And if I may,
yeah,
uh,
please.
so yeah, so it was in an area where I guess there were about 50 women there, and it was all women. There were no men, and so it was in a yoga studio, and which has a great vibe. And I'd given message after message after message, and it was like the evidence was really great. And so I said, I was getting tired, and I said, all right. They were disappointed. They said one more, and I said, there's a young man here and he's showing me, and I won't go into what he showed me, but there was a group off to the right in
Hmm.
the back of the studio, and it was like three young girls. And then there was a mother, daughter, and grandmother over to my right, but right in front of me. And then there were two young women to my left. And so I said, there's a young man, and he's showing me, like I said what he looked like, and I said that he has a stick with a frisbee on it, and and they were trying to make it fit. Is that hockey? I said, no, I know what a hockey stick looks like. But
Yeah.
this one young girl, and the girls in the far right back were like this, like shaking their head no. And like the other half of the audience were saying yes. And I said, wait a second, this is really confusing. You are nodding yes, and you look like you're crying. And there you're saying no, and you're saying no, 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 no. And I said, and the girl, I said, well, what is it that you see? And she said, oh, that's a beer game that we play. Apparently they hit the Frisbee or something like that. So
Ah,
stick with the Frisbee. But what had happened, I said, so this fellow, he apparently what I found out, because I don't want to tell the details. So what had happened was he had died of a fentanyl overdose.
right.
And the girls in the back who were saying, no, 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 were with him. And there was some question about the fentanyl, and it was a big party with all these kids. So that was difficult. And
Yeah.
so I realized it was really close to home because everybody knew this young man, and he was 30 years old. And the messages were, I could receive the messages, but then I said, he loves all of you. He's in a better place. He was depressed and all of this, but it was I had to, I guess, out of empathy, stop for the two girls in the back, the three girls in the back, they were just in a panic. I
Yeah.
don't know anything about that. I didn't want to know. And so I ended it with love.
Do you think that would you have controlled that a bit better? Because you said yourself that you was tired and your energy was dropping, and I think that's a consideration. Sometimes
That's true. That's true. Right.
maybe we
But
need. Sorry, sorry,
oh,
Nancy.
yeah,
I
yeah,
would
yeah,
have
yeah.
thought you'd
No,
done it then. Did you
I
notice
know,
that?
I
I'm
love that.
so
Well,
sorry.
I do see Janet, and when I ride bikes, I go into my Zen, and so I meditate when I'm riding bikes.
Yeah.
So we rode bikes, so we'll ride for like today we rode 30 miles, but it's beautiful. It's spring out here, and we were by the Delaware River. So I saw Janet, and Janet told me that she was going to be here. So
Oh, brilliant, brilliant.
so she's here, but my energy level was down. But after it was over, everybody thanked me. They
Yeah.
wanted to hear that he was okay. The whole community wanted to know that he was okay. So yes and no, it was a good read.
Yeah.
And yes, should I follow my instincts to maybe stop? But he popped in and he was so strong that I yielded to it. So it's debatable, but
Yeah.
it worked out in the end.
And maybe that our resistance, and when we're tired, maybe our resistance, because sometimes I'll get a message and I'm not sure if I can do that in the public.
Right.
And for
Well,
it,
I didn't know that he had died of a drug overdose.
okay, and I remember having one where a gentleman told me he had a really bad car accident, and I was in a real dilemma. And he said the problem is unless you tell them how I died, they won't remember me. And the poor guy I'm sorry, guys, you might want to cover your ears at this moment, but he was decapitated as he came out of the car, and it just stuck in this. It was a niece that he was trying to connect with. It stuck in her mind. So and it was over 20 years ago, but he wanted to come through and connect to the family. So, but it was towards the end of the evening. I felt I was tired. And I struggled with being too graphic because sometimes that can come across as being sensational. And
Yes.
I don't want mediumship to be that. But the information I got was unless you give the information, because we can all kind of do it. I've got a gentleman here who passed in a nasty car accident.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that came through. So I'm not sure. There is a line, isn't there? There's a
Yeah, oh,
line.
definitely. Um, I left a lot of and I agree with you. I never would have said that he was decapitated. I never, and when I see a suicide or a drug overdose, I never say that. I say died before his time.
Yeah.
And that's what I said about this young man. And it was only afterwards that I found out that he had died of a fentanyl. I knew it was before his time, but like everybody in the audience knew him and they were so happy to have seen him. And the evidence that I did bring through were his happier times. Yes, he loved hockey. He loved his sister, and he wished that his sister was there. And his sister did not come because she couldn't have handled it. Little did I know that it was only a month before my reading that he had
Oh,
passed. And
oh
so
wow.
Yeah, but people kept coming up to me, saying, I'm so glad he came through. I'm so glad he's okay.
Yeah,
So yeah,
that in itself is brilliant.
yeah.
That's job done, Nancy. Job done, isn't
Well,
it?
same with you. And just we don't have to. There are some things that we just have to, unless you're 100% certain, because sometimes you see physical abuse, you see, you have to tailor your words,
Yeah,
you have to, or just not say them. Usually the sitter will say something. They add to a private reading anyway, but in a public reading, I would never ever go personal. Never.
yeah. Have to be so careful, so
Yes.
careful.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Can we give some of the viewers at home that'll be watching are on at the beginning of their journey? Is there any pitfalls that you could give in terms of what they could avoid in the early stages of development?
Um, yeah, expectation. A lot of people what I see and what Janet, and I discussed, um, a lot of people go into this and, maybe they've heard about it. It seems fun. They'll take a 6-week course, they get a certificate, and then they go out and they start reading people. And in a way, their expectations are you're dealing with people's lives and their minds. So sometimes we're almost like therapists. And, I do have friends that are therapists. Would I send my kids to them? No way. No, I know too much about them. So we have to tamper our expectations for
Yeah,
the new people. They should give certificates on our practice hours rather than like just a 6-week course. Get into practice groups, read people. If you make a mistake, like really, all right, think about what you did. All right, I saw this, I interpreted it. I saw green. No, no, let me see. I saw. I'm trying to give a metaphor, but my left brain came into it and
yeah,
confused me, and so. Not having an expectation of yourself to gradually get into it
yeah,
because it takes years, as you know, it takes years to hone your skill.
yeah,
I think.
yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I think it's different for different people. I know we interviewed Effie Link recently,
Oh, I
medium.
love her. I love her.
She had a bit of an epiphany. Woke up, she's like, "Oh my god, I'm a medium." She had a bit of a download, and that's
Yeah.
not the first person I've heard that happen. And then suddenly, Effie's very intelligent. She absorbed lots of information. She's doing the right things. Working with different mentors, and learning as she goes along. Um, but a lot of people seem to have it. But then for myself, I didn't know as a child that it wasn't until I was an adult when you look back and think, oh, actually, well, there's a sign and there's a sign. My next door neighbor was a medium, and her son was my best friend. So we spent a lot of time in a house that
Oh,
we believed to be haunted, so when I look back and I can see the markers, and incidentally, my sister is also mediumistic,
oh,
but
is she?
she resists it. She's actually seen a Roman in her back garden, a Roman soldier.
I'm sure.
And apparently, before they built her house on the site, it was a new development. They excavated a piece of land there because they knew there was a Roman villa there, and they found 130 odd bodies in a burial site, and they had to take them
Wow.
out. So she was just taking the trash out to the bin, and this Roman soldier was at the bottom of the garden. Uh,
Wow.
I was like, "Did you talk to him?" And she said, "No, did I?" Oh, she said, "I went back and locked the door."
Well, you asked me my opinion. Am I right? No, I could be wrong. There are people like Effie. I know Effie. I think she's terrific. She's read me. I've read her. I think she's excellent.
Yeah,
But that said, Effie, when she got that epiphany, she poured herself into it.
yeah,
It's not as if she took a course once a week and then after 6 weeks. That's what I was referencing. Perhaps I was flippant, but no, that was my opinion in what I've seen.
yeah.
But sure, are there people who like can do this immediately? Why not?
Well, I think I've got a unique perspective doing this podcast because I've met so many people. Normally, I would say so around about 70% of people have a traumatic experience through loss.
Yeah.
and they start to ask the bigger questions, and then they start to connect. Is it predestined? I don't know. You know, Edgar Casey talked about birth, soul life plans, etc. Yeah, I guess that there is something in that. Whether a medium is born, I'm not sure, but I've come to the conclusion with it's kind of been a few years of research, but interviewing so many wonderful mediums, that I believe that it's a natural thing that we all have that's within us.
Yes, I agree. I agree. Couldn't agree more. Everybody has some sort of it. And you were mentioning your sister and the Roman soldier. I just did a little blurb on history and mediumship because if you think about it, you know, it's going so fast.
Yeah,
You know, like everything, all the attention that mediums are getting, and the schooling and all of that. There's a lot we don't know, you know, and because you're not dealing with facts or with something, you know, physical, and you're dealing with the spirit, there's a lot we don't know. But um, a lot of it has to do with credibility because there are many people who were credible who didn't come out because once you did, like me, your reputation implodes, you
yeah,
know, in whatever arena you're in. And so I do know doctors and I know lawyers who have the gift, who haven't come out. They still do it quietly. But one fellow who gives it credibility is General George S. Patton,
ah,
you know, in World War II.
yeah,
He believed that he was reincarnated. And he
ah,
believed, and as he fought battles, and everyone's, you know, he was one of the best military strategists in the world. Um, he actually, people knew that he knew and he had fought, you know, in the Napoleonic War. He was a Roman warrior. And those tactics that he remembers helped him during World War II and other
wow,
battles. And so the fact that he was a general, a U.S. general, and he knew that, and he said he would come back again. So I know what I know. I don't know everything, you know, and you know what you know. And together, you know, as mediums, we should all fit in the pieces
yeah,
so that we can help all of humanity. As you said, we all have a gift.
yeah,
I believe that the spirit lives within us. And when we yield to the spirit or to God, that's where the journey begins. And that's where we just, you know, it's pretty fantastic.
absolutely. Nancy, where do you see yourself though in a few years' time? What is it you would like to do in the next few years in terms of where you see your mediumship going?
You know, one of the my success thinking period is not to expect anything. You know, when I make plans, it never comes out. It never comes out and it never works out. So I'm just going with the flow and we'll see, you know, it's so nice to meet you and you're part of the journey. And, you know, had I not come out, I never would have met you. And so we'll see where it takes me. I have no expectations. I am doing this. I never expected to do this. I am doing this to honor my sister. And I'm not my sister. She was a star. I am not. I'm just doing it because Janet wanted me to do it. And so we'll see what happens.
Yeah,
And, but you're right. I wanted to compliment you in that. I've had a past life regression and I thought, I don't know about that one. You know what they thought.
yeah,
I'm not going to say it, but I've always loved history, American history. I just love it. And so I think maybe there was some part of me that was, you know, back in America sometime. But you know, like the more we open ourselves up and the more we trust, I think God and the spirit will show us.
yeah.
And so we just have to be malleable and open to what we hear. We hear.
Absolutely. I remember the first time I was in Normandy, I just felt like I was home. So
Really?
yeah, I felt really connected. My
For
sister
World
used
War II? World War II, do you think?
to, possibly, but I've had this kind of fascination with the Plantagenets, and obviously they were connected to Normandy, William the Conqueror.
Ah,
So I think it was probably around that. I've always been fascinated with the knights. So yeah, it could be around that. But then I've always had a fascination with World War II as a child. But then I grew up in that era where there was lots of World War II films on, so you
Yeah,
kind of have to be careful of suggestion.
that's
But
true. That's true. Yeah.
but but no, I can only go with what I felt when I turned up, and I went to Falaise, the castle where William the Conqueror was born. And just felt connected to the area. It was really interesting. So that, and I think that's more, if you're feeling that subtle pull or that force, there's truth in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
So
you could taste it. You tasted like you were home, you said.
yeah,
Ooh,
absolutely,
that's a taste. That's a
absolutely.
knowing.
Well, I have
So,
that within my mediumship. I get when I know someone has cancer, I can taste the chemo they
oh,
give us when
interesting.
they poison us to kind of kill
Yeah.
the cancer. I can taste a metallic taste, so I know they've had that experience, and it helps me to move through that. It's just, I think it's another layer of evidence for me. Before we go though, Nancy, I would love to know about your clairaudience, because so many people struggle and would love to hear spirit.
Okay. So, well, when I was trading, all right. So when I was, let me see, when could I hear it? Through the years, I've heard voices, and it's a deep, deep voice.
Yeah,
And I think it's God.
yeah,
Now, the more I evolve, and I remember, so I would have a big Easter dinner, like, and there's a whole bunch of us, and there were lots of kids. And when Janet was alive, I remember when she was out of becoming a nun and getting into spiritualism.
yeah.
I said, would you say the prayer? And she said, Mother, Father, God. And I swear at the table, everybody was huge eye roll. Everybody's like, oh God, what if she's like Mother, Father, God? But I have read the Bible twice, and how do we know that God is a male? We don't know that,
No,
and so, but I do hear a deep voice, and it tells me, it just brings my attention. When I was trading, I could hear a voice. Now, I didn't hear that it was a different voice. It was a voice within my head saying, this or that on big decisions in my life. I hear a voice in my head. It's not a woman's voice. It's not a man's voice. It's almost a whisper. And I hear that voice. And so, but I'm seeking it out. And that's why I hear it. Now, sometimes, now the other day, not the other day, about a year and a half ago, I was doing a meditation, and I heard that really deep, deep voice saying, hello, Nancy. I haven't seen you. Hello, Nancy. I haven't seen you in a long time. And, that was, while I was getting reconnected. And so we just have to
yeah,
listen for the voice. And sometimes it can be a voice, or sometimes it could just be a voice in your head.
yeah, like an internal voice.
Yes.
But see, I mean, I get it like statements rather than a conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I find that really interesting. And it's interesting. We recently interviewed Sonia Rinaldi, also Elisa Beaver, that do not inspirational, I should know this, instrumental trans communication, where they pick up spirit voices of our deceased. And Elisa, and I haven't shared this, guys, but I will share this. I asked Lisa if she could pick up my father, and he did the same thing. He came through, he gave his first name, second name, and he said, talk to mum. Now, Elisa had no idea that my mother's still alive. She's still
Oh,
here.
wow.
And knowing my dad, the first thought he would have is let mum know I'm okay. But it
Hmm.
was the way the statement come out. Sid Bannister, talk to mum. It's amazing, isn't it? And I had a bit of an epiphany, because the way that they talk, or they've captured the voice, is very similar to what I get. So yeah, it's kind of, I the mystery
It's
of it
amazing. I
is
know. I
amazing.
know. That's their gift.
Yeah,
And that is their gift. And so I guess part of the journey is getting to know what gift one has,
yeah.
what my gift is, what your gift is. And so I'm just relaxed, and I have no expectations, and we'll see where it goes. And um you mentioned Effie. I really like Effie, and I've made some very interesting friends along the way, and Effie is one of them. And now hopefully you are too.
Absolutely. The other thing I was going to say before we go, what is the one thing, I should have given you some warning on this, Nancy, I'm so sorry. What is the one thing within mediumship that we should be talking about and we're not?
That it's sacred. It's not to be sensationalized.
Yeah.
It's not to be um, uh, like thought of as fun.
Yeah.
It's sacred. It's sacred. You know, some people say it's not a gift because everyone has an intuitiveness, but it's just sacred. It's just sacred and not to be toiled with.
Great answer. I mean, how does that sit when I kind of square this off where I believe that people should be made aware of life after life. Life exists beyond this reality. And it's part of a healing process. If we could, I'm having a brain fart again. I have to edit this bit out. What I'm trying to say. So, for me, when you see people doing large demonstrations and they sensationalize it, they're in big theaters, I actually don't mind that because it's bringing everyday people into that awareness that there's something else.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's no judgment on that, but it's just getting people to maybe have that thought, to be not necessarily to be completely, believers. That's not what we're looking for, but be open to there's more to this life.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah. And I mean no ill will towards large groups or famous people, and they're good. They can bring through the evidence, and no, there's no judgment there, but that we not forget that this is sacred.
Yeah. Yeah. Nancy Nohavec, thank you so much for spending an hour with me here on Spiritual Talk. It's been an absolute privilege.
Thank you. Thank you. And if I may plug myself, my Nancy Nohavec. Yeah. NancyNohavec.com is my website.
And we'll put that in the comments, guys, below. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share, and just let us know what you think of the interview. Say hi to Nancy, leave your comments below, and also any guests you'd like to get us on, and we'll do our best to get them on Spiritual Talk. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll be back again with another great interview very soon. Take care for now, everybody.
Thanks, Paul.
Take care, Nancy. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.